Well, so delighted to have Steve Norris with me. He is Director of Production and Content at Gravity Media, and he is a guest on the Honest Nothing podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, and this is a place where we get to learn about not just the work side of one guest in Steve Norris, but also the personal side as well. So I get to look at everything, and we're excited to have you on, Steve. Thanks so much for being a part of this.
Brian, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So when I think about your career and I think of the idea of making it, I know sometimes that can be a moving target, but when did you feel for the first time that you had made it?
Wow, that's a good question. I think the time I first felt I'd made it, having done, since, well, being at school, doing A levels, being at university, doing a number of the normal jobs that you get, working on a building site, being a gardener, working in shops, all the stuff you do for cash when you're a student, you sort of think, okay, those are just the getting by jobs. And then when did I think I'd made it? Probably when I got my job at the first sports channel that I worked for, which was a company called Champion Sports, and it was a satellite broadcaster in the UK. And I was suddenly in a sports channel, suddenly had gone from leaving university, and then within 6 months, I'd kind of applied to multiple jobs, all the kind of runner positions that you do to get in at the ground level. And I got a job basically working in tape traffic, which is a glorified title of putting tapes in boxes and sending them somewhere else. And then, but I suddenly, wow, I'm in a sports channel. There's live sport happening in this building. And then you think, wow, the options are endless now.
Those options are endless. And when you got into that opportunity, you started to dream. I feel like you've always been a dreamer at heart because that is where the vision and the goals they really seem to play out and where you want to go and where you think you can go. But when you're just getting your feet in this industry and you're allowing your imagination to run wild, what is that imagination telling you?
Well, I think the first thing was that I'm incredibly lucky because I was a sports obsessive all my life. I'd played sport from as early as I can remember. My dad was a professional footballer. We played every kind of sport under the sun every Sunday in the park, etc. And so I just had a love of sport. So when I got a job in a sports channel, I thought I've just turned my hobby into my job. So that was kind of I said, wow, how many people are allowed to do that or get the opportunity to do that? So I was in totally the right place. I was surrounded by sports obsessives. And what I quickly realized is that I had half of the knowledge already because I just spent a lifetime playing sport and watching sport. And now all I needed to do was take all of that and put the TV wrap around it. Okay, so you spent a lifetime watching sport. I can go back to Muhammad Ali fights or World Cups or think, okay, now you were watching it as a punter, as a fan. Now think about watching it as a professional working in the industry. What did you think about it and how was it put together? What were the good bits? What were the bad bits? So it was transferring a lot of knowledge that I already had, a really good ground start into the TV world, into the sports broadcasting world.
With that said, Steve, how hard is it for you to just sit back and watch a broadcast of a sport when you've got all of these different thoughts pulsating through your mind about did they have the right camera shot? Did that sound good? Was there the storyline that was necessary? How did they handle that situation?
Well, there's two answers. The first one is it's impossible because you kind of your brain is now trained in such a way that it just picks up on things that aren't working or aren't right. But also just sometimes the love of the sport overtakes all of that, and you can just sit on the sofa or be at a football match and just become a fan again because you just get immersed in the passion of the moment and the fact of, great competition, watching people doing the very best they can do on a football pitch or a cricket pitch or in a boxing ring, and you get dragged along with that. So I can still become a fan very easily, and I will find myself shouting at the television or
Hey,
I rarely shout at the television because there's mistakes being made, unless they're really bad mistakes. But I may shout at the television if my team isn't playing as well as I think it should be.
when you think about you in obviously anybody in this industry really has to be somewhat of a perfectionist. There has to be an element of that with all the moving pieces that go into play, and especially when a broadcast, nothing's ever going to be perfect. But when you strive for that kind of perfection, there is that fine line between, hey, I want it to be perfect, but at the same time, there's that idea of, am I being too hard on myself? How do you gauge that between like striving for the best, but also realizing like, hey, you're a human, we're all human, and there's this element where, yeah, we can be hard on ourselves.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is like there is no such thing as the perfect sports broadcast. I don't think it's ever happened. Like it just there will always have been something you could have done better. You know, it's just inevitable. So it's almost if you take that as your base case, then actually looking back, and I was a big fan of looking back on your work. I was always really surprised at how many people would put a show together, a live show, kind of 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, however long it was, and then kind of not go back and watch it or reflect
Mm.
upon it or think about, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? So I think that was a real key for me is kind of watch back what you've done because, when you're sitting there in the moment in the seat, you often don't have the same perspective as a viewer sitting on the couch because it's all happening to you very quickly. And, I think I'm a much better armchair producer than I am sitting on the sofa than I am probably when I go live because there are so many things to think about. And I genuinely do think it is one of those jobs where experience is great. It just you kind of know the mistakes that are going to happen before they happen. Nothing really beats miles on the clock. I
Yeah.
honestly, I will never say that I was the greatest producer in the world, but I would say I've become a better producer over time because time gives you the distance to be able to make good analysis of what's happening.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Steve Norris is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. You talked about how there's the benefit of looking back at a broadcast and seeing what you did and where things could get better or where things were really in a place that you were happy with. How often do you look back, say, at your life, not just broadcasts, but look back at your life and namely your childhood and say, yeah, that was what I wanted, that's what I liked, or this is how I could have done it differently.
Well, I mean that's a big question, Brian.
It is.
Um, I would look, I would say I'm kind of really happy the way it's panned out without any planning. I didn't plan. I knew I wanted to go into media. At the time, I had a lot of friends who kind of worked in film or were actors and stuntmen and did a lot of what I
Sure.
perceived to be at the time really cool jobs. And I thought I definitely want to work in media. And at the time, I wasn't really fussed about what type of media and wasn't really sure what type of media. I mean, once you get into media, there's so many different avenues you can take. But I just perchance happened to get the first job I had was within a sports channel. And obviously, being a sport obsessive, it just became really clear to me what the path was. I mean, in a way, every time I turned on the television and watched live sports broadcasts, I thought, wow, I can do this. This is my path. This is what I can do. I'm surrounded by it. And I think the other thing is at the time when, I eventually ended up working a few years after I first started my first job, I started working for Sky Sports, which, I think with some of the big American networks, the best sports broadcasters in the world. And you suddenly realize that, wow, sport is now becoming a really big business. Sport is going places. When I grew up in England, you didn't have any sports channels. You were very lucky. You had three channels. That was it. And you were very lucky if they showed 4 or 5 live sporting events a week. So the whole concept of sports channels, when I was a kid, didn't exist. And suddenly, Sky come along and then other rivals come along and other operators, and you realize that, wow, sport is big business. This is, 24/7, 7 days a week. What an opportunity. So you realize you're in a real growth industry. You're at the beginning of a massive growth industry. And that was also, hugely influential in me thinking about, I kind of need to really stay in this and get stuck into it because this business is going places.
Where do you see this business going places, the growth and the expansion right now?
Well, I think what's happened with sport, I mean, this is a bit of a cliche, but I think the cliche still stands up. It's the unpredictability of sport. It's the drama of live sport. It's not scripted. You don't know what's going to happen when you turn on the television. It's unlike so many other things. And I think it will always have that cachet and it will always have that relevance. And it has these human moments and this incredible drama that, you can't possibly think about or write or predict or script. And I think that is the beauty of it. It's just you don't know what's going to happen when the referee blows the whistle or the fighters walk into the ring. You just don't know what's going to happen next. And I think it would, the big events can make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And I think they'll always have the ability to do that. So I think that will never go away from sport. I think, that drama is always here to stay. And I think that's the essential DNA of it. It's this unpredictability, this concept of, people or teams trying their very best against each other. And you're going to see, yeah, after 90 minutes or 5 days of a test match or whatever sport it is you watch, you tend to get that result at the end, and you can't predict that.
When you look at how people capture the unpredictability in a broadcast,
Hmm.
what do you like to see when it comes to that?
Well, I have lots of things that I'm sort of very keen on. Is first of all, I think it's really important to tell the story. You've got to tell the story of what's happening, whether that's on the pitch before the match starts. You've got to build up this really compelling narrative. I think, the characters, so much of the world media today is about celebrities, it's about personalities, and you have to build those characters and personalities. That's really important because they're part of the drama. They're the leading actors in the drama, so you have to build them out as well. And look, I think technology has added a huge amount to sport. I don't think you should worship it. I think technology is only a thing to enhance sport, but I think it has changed the viewing habits fundamentally in terms of what you now see on the television screen. But, I think you should always be, I don't think you should be led by technology. I think technology is always that thing to help you tell a better story. I think sometimes you can get a little bit too wrapped up in the technology. But as long as the technology is there to help you to deliver a great story to the viewer, and never forget the viewer, never forget the guy or the girl that's sitting on the couch watching your broadcast. That's the most important. They're your people. They are your audience. So, never exclude them from the broadcast. Always make sure everybody's included.
When you think about making sure everybody's included, I would think that when you're including your knowledge and your input into a broadcast, there's the, hey, this has worked for a while, let's use it. But then there's the, let's keep an open mind about, let's try new things. Where do you draw that line between, hey, this is something that is standard, that's worked, and we need to stick to that, but you're also open to the inevitability of trying something new and something like that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you've seen it in so many different formats. I think, the game of cricket is a great example where traditionally it was a test match game that was played over 5 days. And then we introduced a concept called 50 over cricket, which was sides would play a match and the result would be in one day, over one day, 6 or 7 hours of a live broadcast. And then they introduced the concept of 20 over cricket. And suddenly a cricket match is played within 3 hours and you get a result in 3 hours. So going from 5 days to 3 hours, that's a hell of a journey for cricket, but it really works because we changed what was a very traditional format into a newer format, but we kind of brought a new audience along, also kept the existing audience, and also we very much changed the dynamics of how the game is played and how players approach the game. You play that 20 over version of the game very differently to the way you play the 5 over game. So we completely changed the dynamics of cricket. So I think that's a great example of how innovation within the actual sport itself can really work if you're brave enough to take it. And I think one of the most influential people I worked for at Sky was a gentleman everybody would know called David Hill, who was an Australian, a real entrepreneur and a real innovator. And his mantra was, look, don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And if you've got that kind of backing, if you've got that kind of vision, or if someone's given you that instruction that they really do want you to try things differently, to rip up the rule book, to try stuff that you wouldn't normally have the courage to do because they've got your back to do it, then I think that's a great way to encourage change within the broadcasting world. That if that's one of the sort of instructions that you get from one of your senior bosses, then that's a hell of a thing. You can work with that.
David Hill, one of the best. He came on the
Yeah.
podcast too. You'll have to check that out at some point. He was one of the few that came on for a two-parter. So we had but that's he is just that beacon of hope. He's so full of information. Yeah, it is such an inspirational figure. You think and you talk about the impact that bosses of the past have had on you. Where do you feel like you want to be able to be a role model for those who work with you, and where that comes across and what you like to do?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is would always want them in exactly the same way that I was told when I was coming up through the industry. Do not be afraid of trying different things. Talk them through, analyze them. Don't just do it wildly. Kind of think it through, do it thoughtfully, but never be afraid to change what's historically been considered to be the norm. I do like to give, live television is it can be quite a stressful operation. And, I think it is good to take away that stress from people. I think it's really good to try and take away the stress of live television from people, but without them then losing the focus of, being on a live event and being, completely on point on everything that they do. But I think it is a business where, there is a fair amount of stress with the industry. So I think as a boss, it's your job to try and take away as much of that stress as possible, give them all the tools that they need to succeed. And, I find that, most people, I've always encouraged my staff to not just identify what the problems are, because that's usually quite easy, but identify the problems and also come up with solutions.
Hmm.
I think that's really important. Don't just be someone that points out the problems all the time. Be someone that points out or understands the problems, but also has a raft of ideas that can solve some of those problems. I think that's really important. And I've always said to people within the business is like, enjoy your job. If you work in sports broadcasting, I have a ton of friends who think I do the best job in the world and just are amazed that I get paid money for doing what I do. So I think there's always an element of look, stand back and look at what you do for a living. Compared to a lot of other people, it's a fantastic job. We're privileged and lucky to be doing what we do.
Why do you think it's so hard for so many people in this industry to stand back and sort of admire what they've done?
I think you get immersed in the moment. And, I think truthfully also the higher up you go, I mean, this is one of the things I've definitely realized over, the 30 something years I've been doing it, is that when you're that guy sitting in the truck producing an event, for 5 days or 2 weeks or whatever you're doing, that is your world, that is your universe. Nobody interferes with you, that you're very much, you're the king for those two or 3 weeks, that's what you're doing. I think the further up you move into the industry, you assume all the other issues of the business, whether it's the P&L, the profit, the staffing, the HR. So I think, there is an element is that the further up the industry you move, the more further away you get from the creativity and the program making. So you're not as close to it. And, sometimes I think I love what I do, period. And I've loved every element of my career, but sometimes it's really nice just to be stuck in a broadcast truck and you shut the door and, you're going to do 4 days of the US Open golf, and that's what you're going to do. And you have to worry about anything else. That's all you got to do.
When did you first notice the very first time the signs of creativity in your life when you were a kid? What that looked like?
Oh, I think I think I started. I mean, originally when I was way back in the day at Sky and when I worked in Dubai, I like the creative side of broadcasting, so I would love going out with the camera and doing interviews and doing, little films and short stories on people, but doing it in a very different way. There's a very different way you can film an interview. There's a very different way you can put together a 3-minute piece with a boxer. And I just love that creativity of like me and one cameraman and thinking of lots of different ways to do what was a very, traditionally those were done very linear, A, B, C, D, E. There was a format to it. And I love breaking up that format and doing different things and, doing lots of different reports or stories where you would have the cameras moving and crash zooming and you kind of have different music on it. And Sky were very much, the time at Sky Sports, they were very much, that was their DNA. That was very much their MO. They wanted to do things differently, completely differently from like the BBCs and ITVs of the day that had done it in a very traditional state broadcaster fashion. So I just felt that I was in tune with that. I could tune into that wavelength of that sort of different creativity that you needed for sport, because up until, the early 90s, it had been done in a very, very traditional format. There was there was a sort of almost a manual on how you would do it. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do that. And then you just rip that manual up and try something entirely different. And, fortunately, I was given that leeway with the bosses and the people we had working within Sky. They wanted to see innovation.
I would say though, at the same time, there's probably others in other places that might be pushing back on that. And there's the you're breaking from the norm. How do you deal with that? Maybe the pushback that you got because you and your bosses and your company at the time knew this is something you want to do, and you have to sort of stick to your morals and what you want, despite the fact what other people are saying.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. I mean, I sort of think back to I spent 6 years in Dubai, and we launched a sports channel out in Dubai, and we were broadcasting into India and Pakistan and Sri Lanka and the Asian market. So we were obviously massively cricket focused. And traditionally, things have been done in a very traditional manner there. And, I very much took that kind of satellite broadcasting, Sky Sports type model to India and, did very different broadcast to what they'd seen previously, very different graphic style, very different, lots of music within everything that we did, commercial music, really changed the dynamic. And, you would think that that wouldn't have gone down well, but it went down really well. I mean, it was like really, really popular and accepted. And, that I was in a great position to be able to take all of that learning to essentially what was a new TV market. And, they were heavily into WWE and heavily into cricket, quite into football. And, to be able to bring all those kind of different standards that I'd learned historically in the UK and Europe into those markets was great, and to bring all the staff along that journey, because most of my, 60 or 70 people working for me, most of my team were from those markets, to be able to give them that exposure and sort of say to them, yeah, but we can do this and we can do that. And the thing I used to encourage all of them was, look, you don't need to look to me for inspiration. Like, the creativity is all around you. Just, you can see it online. You can see it in textbooks, in graphics books, in comics. The creativity is all around you. Just watch what's all around you and take the bits you like and apply them or change them. So, you asked me kind of how you sort of deal with the staff in terms of engaging with them and getting to be the best they can be. Often I would say the great thing about what we do for a living is that you just need to turn the telly on and you see different styles everywhere. You can grab a movie sequence from a film and think there's something really nice in there that I can use for sport, or a graphic sequence, or you're surrounded by it. And I would really encourage them to just open your eyes to everything around you. Don't look at it like a punter anymore. Look at it like a broadcaster and see the bits that you want to take. Yeah, oh, I like that style. I like that font. I love those colors. I love that music track. I love the way they put that title sequence together on this film. All those things, you're surrounded by it. So it's sort of, it's about, be a magpie, see what's out there.
What are some of your favorite movie sequences?
Sequences. Well, I can sort of go a bit old school, but look, my favorite movie would probably be Apocalypse Now, just because it was so entirely different, and the opening sequence and the script was amazing. Yeah, I loved Some Like It Hot with Jack Lemmon. It was just an amazing film, and Tony Curtis. I just love that kind of dialogue. Yeah, big fan of Casablanca, which sounds odd, but that's such a great old movie. It stands the test of time. Anything by Scorsese or Coppola are fantastic. So yeah, I'm probably a little bit traditional in some of my movies. Thought the title sequence for Seven was amazing when it first came out, just absolutely incredible. But Blade Runner was another amazing movie that defined, I think, the whole science fiction genre. And you see so many people copying the elements of that movie even today, into science fiction. So it's pretty eclectic, I'd say, Brian, to be honest. I wouldn't say I've got one particular style or director, but yeah, I would say pretty eclectic.
Well, and I think that bodes itself for some fun when it comes to creativity in a sports broadcast, to be a bit eclectic at times. You said you grew up with a father who was a pro footballer. And
Yes.
what was that dynamic like?
Well, he was unlucky because he'd just broken through into the first, he'd just broken through into the first team for Brentford when he was 22, 23, and then had an unbelievably bad break in his leg, which he limped forever. So he was out of the game as quickly as he was in it. But if you went down to the park on a Sunday, you couldn't get the ball off him.
Wow.
He was the best dad on the park, sort of with keepy uppy and skills. So, but yeah, I mean, what was it? We just always had a ball in our hands, or we were always doing something. Whether it was tennis or cricket or golf or football, that was it. We were and we'd watch it all together. And, I was allowed to stay out late on a Saturday night and watch Match of the Day. we'd watch the big boxing from America when it was the Ali fights. So yeah, it was just he gave me my love of sport, and he's not with me anymore, but I know he was like super proud when I got into sport, and I'd ring him up and I'd say, Dad, I'm at the Ryder Cup, or I'm at these kind of different events. And I have a lovely photo of him when I was in the Ryder, I think it was 95, 96 Ryder Cup in Rochester, New York. And we won that Ryder Cup. Europe had come from behind. And then after the event, 3 or 4 days after the event, I had to do a load of filming with the trophy and take it around to various. There's two trophies. There's the replica and there's the real one. Obviously,
Yeah.
but I've just got a great picture of me and my dad sitting in the kitchen with the Ryder Cup, just having a cup of tea with it. So yeah, I know he was chuffed to bits that his son sort of ended up working in sport broadcasting.
What would he say to you in order to show that pride and really illustrate what he thought of you and what you were doing?
He didn't need to say anything. You could see it in his face. He just didn't need to say anything. He was, my dad was a kind of very simple, straightforward man, not a man of many words, but just a very gentle man. And it was written all over his face. You could see it. He thought what I did was amazing. And I'd come back from like the PGA Championship or the US Open. I'd bring him a hat or some balls or something from from the shop there, and he'd be delighted. He'd kind of wear it with pride all the time. So yeah, he's very happy.
How much of like when you think about you just getting into the industry when that happened was fueled and powered by wanting to make dad proud and how much of that was a part of what pushed you?
Gotta be honest, I'm not sure any of it, and that's probably not the answer you're looking for. But I think my dad would have been proud whatever I did. But
Oh.
I think what happened is that he gave me that love of sport, that real obsession with it, that just fundamental love of it. And as I say, to kind of end up in a industry where essentially I turned my hobby into my job. Yeah, that's pretty, I have a lot of great friends who are as obsessed with sport as me are, but they never kind of got the break. They never got lucky. They might be working in insurance or running their own business. But, as many people that I knew as obsessed with sport as me didn't kind of quite get that lucky break. So I'm very grateful for it, and I can't think of anything else I could have or should have done.
The gratitude that comes out in you outside of work. Like you think about how fulfilling what you're doing is when it comes to your job and what you're doing in the industry. But where do you see outside of work that gratitude of life showing itself for you?
In what way? Sorry, just explain
And
that a bit more.
yeah, and just kind of honoring the moment in sort of like we were talking about this earlier about how just being happy with where you are and just I think we sort of said something where at the beginning of our conversation, we're talking about how sometimes even in the industry, it's hard to admire the present moment because we're either working on something or pushing for something, and it's so hard to focus on that present moment. So outside of work, what does like the acceptance of that present moment look like in how you are able to enjoy everything with a life that revolves around work? What is it beyond work that is most enjoyable to you? I guess is where I'm going.
Yeah. Well, look, it's probably the answer you were expecting, but I love playing sport and I still do. So I still, if I can get onto the golf course or the tennis court, I'm happiest when I've got a ball in my hand and I'm doing something. But great family, great kids. We all get on super well. Still go on holiday together. We're all going to Glastonbury together this year. So I've got three boys, all pretty much into their sport. I do have actually a lot of other interests, whether it's history or kind of building projects outside of work. So I do fill my time with lots of things outside of the world of sport. And I think the one thing I would say about sport, and it's not a negative, but I think it is a very distinct genre. It's a very distinct genre. And, I do have lots of interests elsewhere. I'm kind of a bit of a history buff. My degree was in international politics. I spend a lot of time kind of working and reading in that area. So, I think sometimes the only thing I would say about sport is I think sometimes when people hear you work in sport, there are some sections of the world that won't take you that seriously because they just think you're some kind of sports jock and that, you're just into sport and nothing else. And I am, I'm massively into it, but I have lots of other interests outside of it. So, to a large extent, when I kind of finish work, other than being still an avid viewer of sport, I kind of part the work and I do my other things as well, and that kind of keeps me quite sane as well. I do compartmentalize it. So I don't think a huge amount about it when I'm away, and when I'm on holiday, that's holiday and I'm doing different things. So I do kind of put it aside, it's been a massive part of my life, but I do other things as well. And those are just as important to me.
Let me ask you this final question for you. Steve Norris is with me on Bryan Fenley. That which is important to you is raising your children. What can you glean from you as a dad and in the way in which you went about that as your children were young and to see where they are now, the pride in what you did?
Um, well, I think the main thing is they still want to hang out with me. you know, and I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing because it cost me a lot of money to take them. They're 32, 25, and 21, the three boys. They still want to hang out with me. They still want to come on every holiday we go on. So I gotta be doing something right because they're pretty happy at home. They get well fed. I love cooking, so they get great meals all the time. The fridge is always full. They always want to come away on holiday with us. We're all going to Glastonbury together. I need to get them off the payroll, Brian.
I think you should savor every moment. I think that if you've got three sons yourself, you've got to force them on the golf course waiting to happen. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, who's winning of you four on the course? Who's going to be winning that?
Oh no, that's definitely me. That's definitely me. I think that I wouldn't win a football match, and I'm certainly not fit enough. And my middle son is very good at boxing and martial arts, so I definitely wouldn't win. I wouldn't win any of that with him. And my eldest is probably not so much into sport, but we do still all watch it together. So, we will still come round and watch a big pay-per-view boxing event together, which is great. I really enjoy that. That's great fun.
Well, this has been great fun as well. Steve Norris, Director of Production and Content at Gravity Media. I'm Bryan Fenley. Steve, thanks so much for allowing us to get a really look into your life from what you're doing as a father, as a family man, but also in the industry as well. And your start to where you are now, all of that was a lot of fun to listen to. Thanks so much for your time.
I enjoyed it, Brian. That was a trip down memory lane, but thank
Yeah.
you.